Welcome back, deep divers. Are you ready to dive into, the ultimate mystery?
Ooh, I like that.
Today, we're tackling the age-old question.
Okay.
What happens after we die?
All right.
And we've got a pretty fascinating mix of sources for this one.
Yeah?
We're going to be looking at scientific studies.
Nice.
We've got historical accounts. We've even got some personal stories that I think are really going to leave you wondering, is death really the end?
I love it.
And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you're enjoying the deep dive so far.
It's a question that has just captivated humanity, for millennia. Think about it across time.
Yeah.
And cultures. The belief in some form of afterlife is incredibly persistent.
Okay, so we're talking pyramids, ancient burial rituals,
Yes.
visions of heaven and hell. It seems like everyone's got an idea about what happens after we kick the bucket.
Exactly. And while the specifics vary, there's some striking similarities. Out-of-body experiences, journeys to another realm, encounters with beings of light. Even the idea of a life review where you re-experience your past deeds. These themes, they just crop up again and again.
So it's not just some random cultural quirk.
Right.
It seems like there's a deeper, almost universal human fascination with what lies beyond.
Yeah.
But what if we could move beyond just belief and actually explore this with a bit more science?
Well, that's where near-death experiences, or NDEs, come in.
Okay.
They offer a unique window into what might happen when we're on the brink of death.
I've heard some pretty wild stories about NDEs.
Yeah.
People seeing a bright light, feeling a sense of peace, even floating above their own bodies.
Yeah.
But is there any, real evidence to back this up?
There is Dr. Jeffrey Long and the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, or NDERF, have conducted the largest study on NDEs to date.
Wow.
Analyzing over 1,300 accounts.
Okay.
And what's remarkable is they've uncovered some pretty compelling patterns.
Okay, spill the tea.
Okay.
What kind of patterns are we talking about?
Well, for starters, there's the phenomenon of veridical out-of-body experiences.
Veridical.
Veridical simply means the experience can be factually verified.
Okay.
People report events happening while they were clinically dead outside of their bodies, and those reports are later confirmed by witnesses or medical records.
Wait, hold on. So they're basically seeing things that they couldn't possibly have seen from their physical location.
Precisely, and it gets even more interesting.
Oh,
So
certainly.
people report having NDEs while under general anesthesia
What?
when their brain activity should be minimal.
So if the brain is essentially offline, where is this consciousness coming from? It's almost as if consciousness isn't entirely dependent on the physical brain.
That's the question that's baffling researchers.
Yeah?
And here's another intriguing piece of the puzzle. NDEs have a profound transformative effect on people. They often report a decreased fear of death,
Okay.
increased compassion,
Uh-huh.
a deeper sense of purpose, changes that stick with them long after the experience.
So we're talking about a life-altering shift in perspective.
Yes.
It's not just a fleeting hallucination.
Right.
It seems to have a real impact on how people view the world and themselves.
Absolutely. And here's another layer to this. NDEs share strikingly similar features across cultures. It's not just a Western phenomenon. It transcends religious and cultural boundaries.
Okay, so we've got consistent patterns,
Yeah.
transformative effects, and global consistency.
Uh-huh.
This is starting to feel less like spooky stories and more like a genuine mystery worth investigating.
I agree.
But let's get down to brass tacks. Can you share some specific cases that really illustrate the power of NDEs?
Of course, there's Vicky's story documented in the book Evidence of the Afterlife.
Okay.
Vicky was blind from birth due to damage to her optic nerves.
Wow.
Yet during her NDE, she could see.
Wait, she could actually see, but she was blind her whole life.
Yes. Her experience suggests that consciousness might be able to perceive independently of our physical senses. It challenges our whole understanding of how we experience the world.
That's mind-boggling. It's as if her consciousness, detached from her physical limitations, had access to a different way of perceiving.
Exactly. And then there's Maria's story from surviving death.
Okay.
During her NDE, she saw a shoe on a ledge far from her body. Later, the shoe was found exactly where she described it, even though it would have been impossible for her to see it from her physical location.
Okay, that's straight out of a detective novel.
Right.
But it really happened.
It did. These verifiable details add another layer of intrigue to NDEs.
Yeah.
They suggest that consciousness might be able to perceive things beyond the limitations of our physical senses.
And it makes you wonder what else is possible. If consciousness can do that, what other limits can it transcend?
And perhaps the most mind-bending case is that of Pam Reynolds.
Okay.
She underwent a procedure where her brain activity was completely stopped, no blood flow, no electrical activity, nothing.
Wow.
Yet she reported a detailed NDE.
So even when the brain is essentially offline, consciousness can still persist.
It seems that way.
That really challenges our materialistic view of the mind, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests that consciousness might be something more than just a byproduct of brain activity. It might be something fundamental, something that can exist independently of the physical body.
Okay. These stories are pretty compelling, but we've been focusing a lot on NDEs. What about other hints that this life might not be all there is?
Well, there's another fascinating area of research that delves into this question. Children who claim to remember past lives.
Past lives. Now, that's a whole other level of intrigue.
It is. Dr. Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia has been meticulously investigating these cases, carrying on the legacy of Dr. Ian Stevenson, a pioneer in this field.
So what are we talking about here? Kids just randomly saying they were someone else in a past life?
Not exactly. We're talking about children who provide specific details about past lives, details that can often be verified and have no other explanation.
Okay.
They remember names, places,
Events?
Okay. Even specific details about people they claim to have known in a previous life. And what's remarkable is that these memories often fade as they get older.
All right, I need some give me the juicy details.
Okay. One of the most well-known cases is that of James Leininger, featured in Surviving Death.
Right.
He had vivid memories of being a World War II pilot named James Houston.
Wow.
He remembered details about the plane he flew, the battle he died in, even the names of his fellow soldiers.
And these weren't just vague recollections. He was naming names and giving specific details.
His parents, who initially dismissed it all as childhood fantasy, were eventually convinced by the sheer accuracy and specificity of his memories. They even found evidence corroborating his claims in historical records.
Wow.
It's as if he was reliving a life he had lived before.
That's incredible. Are there other similar cases?
There are many. Another one that comes to mind is Ryan Hammond's, also documented in Surviving Death. He claimed to remember a past life as a Hollywood agent. He described his lavish lifestyle, the movies he worked on, even specific details about his former home.
And again, were those details verified? Could researchers actually find evidence to back up his claims?
To a remarkable degree, yes.
Wow.
Researchers tracked down people who knew the agent Ryan claimed to have been.
Okay.
And many of his memories, including obscure details about Hollywood in the 1930s, were confirmed. It's as if these children are tapping into a memory bank that extends beyond their current lives.
These stories are pretty wild, but I imagine there are plenty of skeptics out there who have alternative explanations for all of this.
Of course, skepticism is healthy and essential in any scientific inquiry.
Right.
Some suggest that NDEs are simply physiological responses to trauma,
Okay.
like oxygen deprivation or hallucinations caused by the dying brain. And when it comes to past life memories, some attribute it to children's active imaginations or even unconsciously absorbing information from their environment.
So basically our brains are playing tricks on us.
That's the argument, but those explanations don't seem to fully account for the evidence.
Okay.
How do you explain vertical OBEs where people accurately perceive things happening far from their bodies while clinically dead?
Right.
Or children recalling intricate details about past lives that are later verified, even though they had no prior exposure to that information.
Right. Those are tough to explain away.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot more to consciousness than we currently understand.
Exactly, and that's what makes this whole topic so compelling.
Yeah.
There's still more questions than answers.
Yeah.
But the research continues pushing the boundaries of what we thought we knew about the nature of consciousness and what might lie beyond.
All right, so we've explored near-death experiences and children who remember past lives. Pretty mind-blowing stuff. But I think a lot of people, when they hear life after death, immediately jump to ghosts and spirits. So where do those fit into all of this?
It's an area that's often shrouded in mystery and skepticism, but it's certainly worth exploring. We're talking about the possibility of communication with those who've passed on a concept that has fascinated humanity for centuries.
Yeah, from ancient oracles to modern-day mediums, it seems like we've always been trying to bridge that gap between the living and the dead. But is there any, real evidence to suggest it's actually possible?
Well, there are countless anecdotal accounts and personal stories, but from a scientific perspective, it's a tricky area to study.
I can imagine. It's not like you could just bring a ghost into a lab and run experiments on it.
Exactly, but that doesn't mean we can't approach it with a critical and investigative mindset. There have been attempts to study mediums under controlled conditions, using techniques like double-blind protocols and hidden cameras to try and eliminate the possibility of trickery.
So they're basically trying to create a scientific seance.
In a way, yes, and the results have been well mixed. Some studies have shown that mediums can provide surprisingly accurate information about deceased individuals, including personal details, personality traits, even specific memories that only the deceased person would have known.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. But how do we know they're not just using clever tricks or cold reading techniques?
That's the challenge. Cold reading is basically a set of techniques used to make it seem like you know more about someone than you actually do. It involves making general statements, observing subtle reactions, and piecing together clues to create the illusion of psychic ability.
So are you saying all mediums are just skilled manipulators?
Not necessarily. While skepticism is important, there are cases that are difficult to explain away so easily. We're talking about mediums providing highly specific details that are later verified details that would have been virtually impossible to guess or research beforehand.
Okay, so there's evidence on both sides. It sounds like the jury's still out on whether mediums can truly communicate with the dead. But even if we entertain the possibility, how does it actually work? What's the mechanism behind it?
That's the million-dollar question we simply don't know. Some theories suggest that consciousness might be a non-local phenomenon, meaning it's not bound by space and time in the way we typically think.
So are we talking about some kind of psychic connection like telepathy?
It could be something like that. This concept of non-locality ties in with some of the other evidence we've discussed, like NDEs and past life memories, where consciousness seems to operate independently of the physical body.
So it's almost like our minds are connected to a larger network of consciousness, and death simply means transitioning to a different part of that network.
That's one way to think about it, and this concept of interconnected consciousness has been explored in various spiritual and philosophical traditions throughout history.
It's certainly a fascinating idea. It makes you wonder if the boundaries between life and death, the seen and unseen, are much more fluid than we typically perceive them to be.
Exactly. And when we delve into the world of spirit communication, we encounter different types of mediums, each with their own approach and alleged abilities.
Oh, right. Like those who claim to channel spirits, allowing them to speak directly through their bodies.
Yes, those are known as trance mediums. They enter a trance-like state and allow a spirit to allegedly take control, speaking through the medium's voice and even exhibiting mannerisms or personality traits of the deceased.
That sounds pretty intense, almost like something out of a horror movie. But I guess if it's real, it would be an incredibly powerful form of communication.
It would certainly be a game changer, and some historical accounts of trance mediums are quite compelling. For example, there's the case of Mrs. Piper, a famous medium from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. She was studied by prominent researchers at the time, including William James, one of the founding fathers of American psychology.
Like William James. The guy who literally wrote the textbook on psychology was investigating mediums.
He was initially quite skeptical. But after witnessing Mrs. Piper's abilities firsthand, he became convinced that something genuinely paranormal was occurring.
So even the scientists of the time were baffled by what they were seeing.
Some of them were, of course, there were always those who remained unconvinced, attributing her abilities to trickery or psychological manipulation. But even today, Mrs. Piper's case remains one of the most well-documented and compelling examples of trance mediumship in history.
Okay, this is all getting pretty spooky, but I have to ask, if we can potentially communicate with the dead, are there ethical considerations we need to be aware of?
Absolutely. If you're considering contacting a medium, it's important to approach it with caution and discernment. Sadly, not all mediums are genuine, and some might prey on vulnerable people seeking connection with loved ones who have passed. It's crucial to do your research, find a reputable source, and be wary of anyone making grandiose promises or guarantees.
So it's like any other field. There are ethical practitioners and those who might be less scrupulous. Buyer beware, right?
Exactly. It's also important to remember that spirit communication, even if genuine, is not a guaranteed or foolproof process. Spirits might not always be available or willing to communicate, and the information received should always be taken with a grain of salt.
That's a good point. It's important to approach this with a healthy dose of skepticism, even while keeping an open mind. But beyond the ethical considerations, what are some of the broader implications of all this? If we can potentially connect with the dead, how does that change our perspective on life and death? That's the big question, isn't it? We've explored near-death experiences, children who remember past lives, even the possibility of communicating with spirits if there's even a chance that death isn't the end. How does that change everything?
It challenges our most fundamental assumptions about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. It forces us to confront the mysteries that lie beyond our current understanding and to grapple with the potential implications for how we live our lives.
So we've gone down this rabbit hole, explored some pretty wild concepts, and now we're left wondering, what does it all mean? What's the big takeaway from all of this?
Perhaps the most profound takeaway is that consciousness might be far more expansive and resilient than we ever imagined. The evidence we've discussed suggests it might not be solely dependent on the physical brain and could even persist beyond the death of the body.
It's like our understanding of the mind is still in its infancy. We're just beginning to scratch the surface of what's possible.
Exactly, and if consciousness can exist independently of the body, then death might not be the end, but rather a transition to a different state of being or a different realm of existence.
Okay, that's a pretty radical concept. It's almost like we're upgrading our operating system, moving from a physical existence to something more ethereal.
That's an interesting analogy, and it raises a whole new set of questions. Do we retain our personalities, our memories, our sense of self in this afterlife realm? Do we reunite with loved ones? What is the nature of this existence beyond the physical?
Those are questions that have pondered philosophers and theologians for centuries. And I'm guessing science doesn't have all the answers yet.
Not even close. But the evidence we've explored suggests that these questions are no longer purely speculative. They're grounded in a growing body of empirical data that challenges our purely materialistic worldview.
So we're moving from the realm of blind faith to something a bit more evidence-based. But even with the evidence we have, there's still a huge leap of faith involved in accepting the possibility of life after death.
Absolutely. It requires a willingness to expand our understanding of what's possible, to embrace the unknown, and to acknowledge that there might be more to reality than we can currently perceive or comprehend.
I'm also thinking about the ethical implications of all this.
Yeah.
If death isn't the end, if there's a possibility of an afterlife, how does that change our perspective on how we live our lives? Does it impact our actions, our choices, our values?
It certainly invites us to live more intentionally, knowing that our actions might have consequences beyond our earthly existence. It also encourages us to prioritize compassion, kindness, and connection, knowing that the essence of who we are might persist beyond the physical realm.
It's a thought-provoking idea, isn't it? If we truly internalize the possibility of an afterlife, it could have a profound impact on how we treat each other and how we navigate the complexities of life.
It could. It challenges us to consider the bigger picture, to recognize our interconnectedness with others and with the universe as a whole. It also invites us to explore the deeper meaning and purpose of our lives beyond the pursuit of material possessions or fleeting pleasures.
So it's not just about what happens after we die, but how this knowledge influences how we live now. It's like a ripple effect, expanding outward from this core concept of consciousness persisting beyond the physical.
Precisely. And this brings us back to the idea of a universal consciousness, a field of interconnected awareness that transcends space and time. If we're all part of this larger web of consciousness, then our actions, thoughts, and intentions have a ripple effect that extends far beyond our individual lives.
Wow, that's a powerful concept. It suggests that we're all interconnected in ways we might not fully grasp, and that our lives have meaning and purpose beyond our individual experiences.
Exactly. And it opens up a whole new realm of possibilities for understanding our place in the universe and the nature of reality itself.
Oh, deep divers. I think we've reached the end of our journey for today. We've explored the mysteries of near-death experiences, past life memories, and spirit communication. We've pondered the implications for our understanding of consciousness and the possibility of life after death.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, so many questions still unanswered.
But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The mystery, the unknown, the infinite possibilities. It keeps us curious. It keeps us searching. It keeps us pushing the boundaries of what we think we know.
Precisely. So as we conclude this deep dive, we encourage you to continue your own exploration. Read, research, ponder, and keep an open mind. The truth, whatever it may be, lies somewhere out there waiting to be discovered.
Thanks for joining us on this mind-bending adventure. If you enjoy the deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe for more explorations into the mysteries of life, the universe, and everything in between. Until next time, keep those minds open and keep diving deep.